My name is Angie, and this is the story I wasn't supposed to find.
And I'm our sister, Cindy. We started this podcast with one name, Stella Smith, our great-grandmother, a woman who gave up 2 daughters, disappeared from history, and left behind almost nothing.
No photos, no grave, no explanation, just a blank space where a person should have been.
Until a DNA test changed everything. Turns out, Stella Smith wasn't even her real name.
Her name was Estrella Suarez. She came to America from Spain as a child. She married twice, left 2 families, and somehow managed to vanish not once, but twice from history.
In season 1, we found Estrella's beginnings in America. We found family we didn't know existed. We sat across a table from cousins who'd been looking for the same woman we had from the other direction. And we thought we were closing a chapter.
We were wrong.
Because season 2 is where things get even more complicated and even more personal. New relatives surface, new documents turn up, and some of the answers we finally found led to questions we'd never thought to ask.
This is Buried Threads, a podcast about family secrets, silence, reinvention, and what happens when the past refuses to stay buried. We've been looking for our missing great-grandmother, Stella Smith DeBoard, who gave up 2 daughters around 1928 and left her husband, Christopher DeBoard. Through a DNA test, we found out that Stella was actually Estrella Suarez, an immigrant from Spain who came as a child and lived with her uncle and his family. Her uncle, Manuel, was a widower. He remarried Rosa, and together they had 4 children. So in the household, there was Estrella, Luisa, the daughter through his first wife, Concepcion, Bernardina, who passed away at 16 months old, Joe, Pasita, also Nina, and Anna.
We recommend listening to the episodes in season 1 and the prior episodes in this season for all of the details. You can get caught up on Estrella's life and timeline and our story of discovery. There is much, much more to know about this story.
So we received a wonderful gift from a family member. Susan is one of the first people that I reached out to when I was doing research on the family. Like after I'd already talked to Paul and realized that Estrella was a Suarez, Susan had a very well-developed tree on the family. And so I reached out to her and asked her a lot of information, and she shared a ton of information pretty early on. Susan's connection to the family, she's married to Philip Sazota. Philip's mother is Nina Pasita, and the daughter of Manuel and Rosa. Over the years, we've talked many times, but once the podcast began, I sent a link to the podcast to everyone who helped and suggested they might want to follow along. And she did. And so as they began to listen, they became inspired to just kind of remember some more things and dig into the things that they had been told. And they pulled out some artifacts that they had tucked away, I'm presuming in their attic or their basement or, somewhere. And one of the things that came out of that is a recording, a tape recording of Nina of talking about her life and family. Literally, one of the stories she tells is the story of the day Estrella left.
Can I stop you for a second and tell you something? So
yeah,
this is so funny. Every time I refer to these, I keep calling them the Nina tapes. And my husband's like, Cindy, you need to call them recordings because Nina tape sounds like something scandalous. So hopefully I'll refer to them as the recording. However, you can tell from the sound quality, they were definitely recorded on cassette.
Yes. So, it's just such a treasure. We were so excited to receive this. And so thankful to Susan for thinking of us and for sharing this with us and for following along. They are still very much involved in the story. I get frequent text updates after, episodes come out. And so I'm just excited to be able to share this with other people who knew Estrella or who's, in this case, mother knew Estrella, right? Who've always wondered where she went and have been very interested in their story as well. So anyways, we some of the quality of the sound is not the best. We're going to do a little bit of cleanup and try to make it as easy as to listen to as possible, but some really informational things and also some fun anecdotal stories that just give a picture of the family. That'll be fun to hear as we go through. Yeah. So what an incredible blessing to hear her talk about her memories in her own voice. We're going to share some clips.
Yeah.
We've always said documents are great for giving us facts, but there's nothing like talking to people who were there, who knew the people that we're discussing and who lived it.
Did you ever think that we would hear someone from the household Estrella basically grew up in the US, from Manuel and Rosa's household, be able to tell us stories in their own voice at this point in the search.
I was in my car driving when the messages came, and I almost had a heart attack while I was driving.
Yeah. Who gets this? This is so incredible. I feel like this is an incredible resource. So, all right, what we're going to do, we're going to listen to a clip, and then Angie will talk about what we hear.
Okay, what did you and your brothers and sisters do to describe that? First of all, let's talk about your brothers and sisters and explain it just so you know who they all were. There was Louise.
They were Louise. I have to say,
Yeah, sister.
I had another sister by the name of Stella.
Stella was the oldest, right?
She was the oldest.
And how old they? Stella and Louise were children by Grandpa before Grandpa was first married.
Yeah.
Where he married your mother, Rosa Rodriguez, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And it was Manuel Suarez, right?
Well, yeah.
Suarez.
Okay, I know that was a short little clip. So I believe this is her son. Does that sound right? Who's
Yes.
asking her questions?
Yes.
And so he is doing this for the purpose of getting record of her talking about her family, getting a record of these things, which is a fantastic idea. So in their conversation, I know that was a little clip. He asked about her brothers and sisters, and she gets distracted from that part of the conversation. But we have maybe an hour and a half of recordings. And so she comes back later and talks about them. So just to sort of review, if you couldn't hear what was said here and then what we know. So Nina here is sharing, he asked her about her brothers and sisters. Interestingly, first mentions Louisa, but isn't it interesting she calls her Louise? And I hadn't heard that before. Have you heard that, Angie?
Yeah. No.
So that's just interesting. Do we have documentation of her name, whether it is Louisa or Louise?
I do. I would need to look it up. I would
Yeah.
not want to trust my memory to say what it says.
Oh, well, and we know that the family does use a lot of nicknames. So Louise could just be a nickname for Louisa. It could be the
Yeah.
anglicized version. But she does say, if you couldn't understand, she does say she's her half sister through Manuel, of course. And then she mentions Estrella, but she actually calls her Stella, which is something we wondered too. Did she go by Stella as a child? Well, clearly she did. And she says that she's her half sister, which they go on to talk about this. Nina believed, so her name is Pasita. She goes by Nina. We'll talk more about that later. She did believe that Estrella was Manuel's daughter, her half sister. She was raised that way, but just for our listeners, we do know by DNA that she was Manuel's niece, not his daughter. And they also point out she was the oldest in the household. And she doesn't seem to know Concepcion's name. She never mentions, she just says his first wife.
Yeah.
In all the recordings, she never mentions her name. So
she doesn't mention the other siblings here, but then she later mentions that there's Joe and Anna. She says that Joe was a boxer, that he won the Golden Glove in Chicago, and talks about his marriage. She doesn't mention Bernardina by name, but later when they're talking about the pandemic and the Spanish flu, she mentioned having an older sister who died. And then she later talks about family celebrations and names. And she says that she didn't know why she was named Pasita, which everyone else was named for saints. And Philip tells her that Pasita means peace and said maybe it was a peaceful labor.
Yeah. I thought this was kind of sweet. Now, I don't know that this is true, but I was thinking about our last episode and what we talked about Bernardina. Bernardina was born in 1916 and Joe was born in 1917. And a month after Joe was born, Bernardina passed away. And Nina Pasita was born, I think, in 1918. I think that's correct. She was the next born child. And Rosa named her Peace.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that was a sweet nod. I don't believe it's a coincidence. Naming is important, Naming is important.
It is.
I mean, they intentionally named their kids after saints. So to not do that means it was probably an important reason to not do that. So I thought that was sweet.
And it was a girl, right?
And it was a girl. Yeah, it was a girl. So any observations or thoughts about this little section about her siblings?
I just thought it was interesting that she, again, referred to Stella as her half sister. And I'm not going to belabor that, but I just think it goes to what we said before, that no matter how it was that she got there and what her DNA says, she was raised as a sibling. Like, Nina didn't think of her as my nanny. She didn't think of her as my, caregiver.
My
She was
cousin
my sister.
or yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting too. Nina did grow up believing that Luisa and Estrella were his children through his first marriage. Early on, when we were talking about Manuel and Rosa's story, Rosa joined him in St. Louis. They got married, and then the two of them, Luisa and Estrella, all moved to Taylor Springs. And you said, and that's where their life began. And actually, Nina says something similar. They began their life together there, Taylor Springs. And you mentioned how that was a real thing for them, like a literal thing. Much of the family, Nina talks about it a little bit, but much of the family doesn't know much of even Manuel's life before Taylor Springs.
They didn't even know that they were married in St. Louis. Like, when I was talking about St. Louis, like, what? Like, and I was able to show the marriage license, the marriage certificate that showed addresses. And that was mind blowing to them because, again, it's just, as far as they knew, life began here.
Yes. And that's an interesting way family stories are built. If they never really talked about before, then most of family memory. Now, Nina does talk about that a little bit, but most of family memory is from that point forward. So it's really interesting. Okay, I'm going to play another clip. This one focuses a little more on Estrella specifically. So we're going to hear what Nina has to say.
Okay, so how about your other brothers and sisters? Like, there was Stella.
Stella got married very young. I really think it was like a match marriage. This young man came from Spain. He was single.
Well, he was married in your house in Sanville.
Yeah.
Sanville?
No, this was in Taylor Springs.
Taylor Springs, Illinois. His name was
Emilio Valdez. Do you remember him?
Emilio Valdez. Emil.
Yeah, Emil. I think it was arranged marriage.
Between your father and Emil?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then they were married, and I could just, and I was a kid, but I could see that there was nothing there,
She didn't like it.
So then they moved went to a smaller club to Taylor Springs. They moved to Igler like we did, and they had a house in the back of the alley, like 10 corner from us.
Right.
This is interesting. Before we get into the details of what it was, just in case people couldn't understand, like what are your first thoughts?
Well, my first thought is there are several things we need to unpack in there, but we'll get to that in a minute. But it was very interesting. When you hear her talk about Estrella, I felt like I could hear compassion and not judgment in her voice. I mean, obviously, she didn't know all the choices that Stella had made by the time she's recording this, but she knows about some significant ones. And I just felt like there was tenderness and care in the way that she was sharing the story, not judgy. And I thought that's interesting.
Yeah. What a gem to just have Nina talking about this directly. Somebody who was there and witnessed it. She would have been roughly, well, we'll get into the date. We'll get into the time. But this is a lot of information about this time period from someone who...
There's a lot of details packed in that little clip.
A lot of details. So one of the things that she said is Estrella married young. We know based on documents that she was around 15. I think that's what the marriage license says. She was around 15 years old to Emilio Valdez. They call him Emil.
Mm-hmm.
She also says that he was a young single man from Spain. He was a boarder in their home in Taylor Springs. Yeah. And at another portion of the recording, she talks about Rosa taking in boarders often. Like that was one of the ways that she earned money. Single men especially would come from Spain to work in the mines, and they would look for Spanish boarders to live with. And
she would make the meals. She would make their lunch. They would come home. They would come lunch back to the house, and she'd feed them all.
Correct. She would feed them. And Emilio, we know, at least according to the marriage license, was about 23 years old. Actually, I think we know that for a fact because we have his gravestone. So, but how interesting that this woman who was a child at the time says she believes that this was an arranged marriage.
Yep. She said, I don't know if you heard that part. It was a little bit difficult to hear. It said that there was nothing there, that she didn't like him.
Yes. And later she says about Estrella, well, she calls her Stella, but she said she was just a kid. That's how she described Estrella. So no matter whether this was culturally normal within the family, whatever the case might be, from her perspective, she viewed Estrella as being very young when she got married.
Yeah. And keep in mind, she's the little sister.
Yes.
And I mean, we know not biologically sister, but the way the family order went, she was the little sister.
And grew up that way, grew up as her younger sister. Nina also mentioned in there a move that we didn't know about.
This becomes very important. It's
a move we didn't know about. So what she said was that the mine closed in Taylor Springs. Now, I did research this. The zinc mine in Taylor Springs did not completely close until like 2000, I think 3, but definitely in the early 2000s. So I was like, well, what happened in this time period that he would have perceived that the mine closed, because they did move around for work.
Yeah.
But when I researched it, there were major strikes going on, worker strikes in the early 1920s. And so I'm not a gambling woman, but if I had to lay a bet, I would say that because of the strikes, they were out of work and then relocated to Hegler. It's Hegeler. She actually spells it out because her son thought she said Hitler, Illinois. So he spells it out for her. But Manuel and Rosa moved there for work. And then she also says that Emilio, Estrella, and their daughter, her name's Maria, we call her Mary Rose, also moved and then lived catty corner behind them. So they were still together, but living in separate households. But we didn't know.
We did not know. And this was a huge deal for this reason. So the last record we had was the 1920 census, where they all were living in Taylor Springs. And, she left a few years later. And so the assumption was from Taylor Springs. But now we learned actually they had moved to Hegler. And actually the story of what happened when Estrella left happened from Hegler.
Yes.
Well, this opens a whole lot of interesting details that we're gonna unpack in a little bit. And it answers one of the big questions.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about these details. We do have a recording of Nina telling the story about Estrella leaving. Just out of sensitivity to family members, we're not going to play that portion of the recording. It's just not necessary. But here are some of the things that we know from her talking about it. One, we know that Nina would have been 6 or 7 years old at the time that Estrella left. Now, this is interesting, and I want to qualify this with this is Nina's opinion or perspective as a child. I mean, she's in her 70s when she's telling us this, but this is what she believed when she was a child. In the recording, she says that she knew at the time that Estrella was having an affair with another man.
That she saw the man in their house.
Saw the man in their home. And she says, like, I was just a child. She's sort of, anyway, from her perspective. Again, we can't verify that. We're not declaring that, but that was from her perspective. There was another man in the picture. And we also have to take into account if after Estrella left, the family just made the assumption that she ran off with another man. She could have constructed that memory. I have no reason to believe that this isn't true, but I also don't want to declare that it is true. We're not trying to smear anybody's character here. We're just saying that was Nina's perspective. And the timeline supports it, and we're going to talk more about that. But family story has always been that Estrella just disappeared one day, and Nina supports that story. Her account of the day supports it. She seems to remember the day, and she does believe she ran off with another man, which is a question we always had. Another interesting point, because it speaks to the timeline, she says that Estrella's daughter, Mary Rose, was 2 years old. Now, at one point, we had her a little younger than 1. Then we kind of thought, well, maybe between 1 and 2, the family didn't really, even Paul didn't really have a specific date for when Estrella left. But when Nina talks about this, she describes Mary Rose as walking and speaking. So that fits, that's a little closer to 2 than to 1. I think we would be wise to assume she was around 2. And then she says that Mary Rose was then taken to Manuel and Rosa's, who raised her from that point on as their daughter. And of course, Nina, called her sister. And then Nina and her son guessed together that Estrella was about 18 years old when she left. We're going to talk about implications of this information, but I want to play one more clip. It's very short.
So Stella got married. She was probably about 16 or 17 when she got married. Yeah, she was married. She was there for what, 2 years, and then she took off.
I
She was about 18.
yeah. My uncle wished that I could have seen her again, you know?
The last thing Nina said there is kind of hard to understand. She said, I often wish I could have seen her again.
Yeah. So one of the things that Phil and Susan told me many times over the years is that she always wanted to know what happened to Stella. She talked about it frequently. She was really wanting to know a lot.
Which again speaks to their relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a lot of these details, a lot we already knew. Although it is powerful to hear the story from someone who was there, who witnessed it. But let's talk about the new information and let's talk about some of the implications of this information. Right? So why don't you, Angie, just talk about the timeline, what we've learned about the timeline and what some of the implications are of this timeline.
Okay. So now that we know that Mary was 2 years old, this gap now has closed because now the difference between when she turned 2, it would have been like June, and she married Christopher in like the fall.
Yeah. November.
So
I
now
think,
you're
right?
talking, yeah, so you're talking, we don't know exactly when she ran off, but it just makes that window much smaller. And so it really makes it less about, oh, she ran off and met Christopher and married him, to more looking like they ran off and got married.
Yeah. Well, there's a big difference because we thought there was over a year between the two events.
Right. So that's what I thought. So she must have left and just started a new life and then met him, and who knows how. And we always wondered, how did she ever come across Christopher?
Right.
And it's interesting. The only thing we know about this until we unwrap today is in the Children's Home and Aid Society summary about the family. The question is asked of how they met. And she just said that they met at the home of a friend. Now, who knows what that friend is or whatever. And we'll talk when I unwrap some more stuff, what I think that might have been referring to.
Yeah.
It makes that window now, we're not talking about two separate events. We're likely talking about one event.
Right. Well, and geography plays a really important part. So let's talk about some of the implications of the new geography. Nina said that both families, because of work at the mine, probably strikes going on, that they moved from Taylor Springs to Hegler. Angie, tell us where Hegler is.
Well, I didn't know. I've never heard of Hegler. And so where is Hegler? Well, Hegler is just a mile or two outside of Danville, Illinois. Light bulb. Danville is a key piece of our story. Do you know why?
Well, I know why.
So Estrella left from Hegler, or Estrella left from Danville, not from Taylor Springs.
Correct.
We had talked about this, the expense and difficulty of a young woman doing this on her own, going 50 miles. Hegler is 123 miles. That's even farther away from Springfield. But there's someone else in our story that has a documented history of making a regular and routine path between Springfield and Danville. And who is that person?
Oh, Christopher.
Yes. So we have instantly said, now we know how their paths crossed. Their paths crossed in Danville.
Yeah. I mean, do we have documentation of that? No. But we have a firsthand witness account. We have documentation of Christopher showing up in Danville in the same time.
Yes.
It probably won't be hard to find documentation of the Suarezes and the Valdezes being located in Hegler as well. If we probably can document that, although we haven't done that yet. So when we find people in the same location, we can draw a straight line between the two events, as opposed to, well, we kind of don't know how we got from here to there. It would just be almost too coincidental.
It goes from being ambiguous to being very specific.
Right. And the simplest answer is often the right one. Right? So let's talk about theories, beginning with, we always had this theory that Estrella didn't leave on her own.
I said it many times.
Yeah, but you did. We just had a theory that she didn't, we couldn't prove it, didn't have any facts to back it up, but just that she didn't leave on her own. And now what we do have is a firsthand account basically saying, yeah, we also don't believe she left on her own. I mean, literally, we, by this firsthand witness account, don't believe that she left on her own.
Well, listen to this. Listen to this. I was looking also, not only that Hegler is just south of Danville, but a place that we have Christopher documented going to Danville was to the Danville Veterans Home, the VA home there. And so I wanted to look and see where's that, which by the way is also south of Danville, not on the exact same road, but only something like a mile and a half between Hegler and the Danville Veterans Home. So close proximity. Now we know he was going from Springfield there. Who knows how he was getting there, but probably not by car. And so what does that path look like? And again, who knows how, I can only speculate about how this was operating, but they were running a boarding house. Is that how they met? Or the other thing is, I don't know if we talked about this yet or not, but we know from other research, other scenarios, other things that we've learned about Emilio in particular, that he was a little bit of a partier. That he liked to, he liked to
Carouser.
drink and, carouser. Yes. And we also know a similar thing about Christopher. So as I'm supposing, did they meet? This is not a big area. There's not that many places to carouse. Did they meet, in an environment like this? And did Emil bring him back to the house because they run a boarding house? Hey, you need a place to stay? You can stay here.
Yeah. Or he could have been a boarder with somebody else nearby, like Manuel and Rosa, or somebody else in the neighborhood. They probably weren't the only people who took him boarder.
Right. Exactly.
And Christopher was a laborer. He didn't have a career. I don't know what the word would be now. The occupation word is laborer. I think he did work when it suited him to get whatever he wanted. But all the jobs he ever listed outside of the military were labor jobs.
Right.
And
a painter, whatever. Yeah.
Right. So the places that he was a factory worker too, I think at one point. So the places that he would have been staying and the places he would have been frequenting would be similar to the places that Emilio or even Manuel would have likely been as well. Yeah, that's just true. So it's definitely possible that their paths cross that way.
Well, and it just takes it from this random, how did these two stars in the universe, collide to, actually, we brought the geography in, we brought all the facts in. There's actually a pretty plausible way they could have collided.
Yeah. So then Nina also gives us this other interesting context. She believed that Estrella and Emilio's marriage was arranged. So you have a 15-year-old girl in an arranged marriage with a 23-year-old man. And I know it's easy to look back on history and to judge the way things happen and the way things were, whether this was a cultural norm, whether it was just familial norm, whatever the case might be. The fact is, a 15-year-old and a 23-year-old today, we call that something else. And there's a reason that it is that way, because we understand the impact. We understand the ability for a 15-year-old child to make those kinds of decisions, to be able to have the forethought of consequences. So we don't want to assume too much, but from Nina's view, she believed that Estrella did not have feelings for Emilio. She said there was nothing there. And her son said she didn't like him. And she said no. Now, that doesn't mean Emilio's a bad guy or anything like that. And it also doesn't mean that Estrella protested this arrangement. We're not trying to build a fairy tale here, although it is interesting that she does talk a lot in sort of fairy tale style about her life. But we're not trying to build a fairy tale. We're just saying that it's possible, and we're theorizing, it's possible that she didn't protest this arrangement because this is just what was done. That this was sort of normal. But at the same time, where Nina says, well, she didn't have feelings for him, gives us a context for what she sensed as what it was like in their home.
Just to kind of build on that same thing. This is also like the collision, and this happens with lots of immigrant families, the collision of old world values and new world values. They brought with them cultural expectations of the way things were before, but now they're living in a environment where that's not the same. And typically it's usually the older children that get caught in that the most, of the push back and forth between how do you respect that old culture and embrace the new culture. Also, this is the 1920s. What's happening like with regards to women and all of these kind of things at this time period in general, right? Women are beginning to have this voice of being able to say, I don't want this. So, and so I just think it's very interesting how all those things intersect with each other at the same time.
Yeah. And Estrella is of the age, and I mean, she likely would have been impacted by the societal thought coming to be for women in the 1920s.
Yes.
You know, it was
Yep.
the beginning of women's liberation in a lot of ways. I mean, it was still a long trek after that, but it was the beginning where women were beginning to rebel against the traditional expectations, some women. So yeah, interesting. Really, these are all different theories based on what we know and based on the choice that Estrella made, and then also based on Nina's account. But the big theory that we're really coming down to, and we have to just say it out loud, you know, we just wonder if Christopher might have been the man that Estrella was having an affair with or some sort of relationship with, if Christopher is the one that she left Danville with. That's the theory.
I would bet money on that.
Yes. I wish that we could show Nina a picture of Christopher
Yep.
and say, does this guy look familiar to you? You know, so, you know, we think about this. Estrella was still young. She's married to somebody that it appears she didn't have feelings for. I don't want to assume too much, but maybe feeling trapped, maybe still also dealing with grief of loss, maybe stacked losses like we've talked about. We know that Christopher is known to be in this place, but also in these places, in you know, a boarder or a worker, a laborer, a carouser, all those things. So it's totally plausible that she could have left with Christopher. And then think about this. Okay, here's the one that I find really intriguing. Christopher was very adept at traveling. He was a wanderer, we call him, kind of surviving on the road, under the radar, and using false identity.
Yes, he was. Documented. 5.
So, yeah. And that documented, that's all prior to, or all of that is prior to his marrying Stella or Estrella, or is it intermixed?
No, that's after. Because he was discharged from Leavenworth. A year later is when he married Stella. Now, he'd already started his little games then, but then all the rest that happened in the years after. So yeah, it was after his marriage.
So it started before, but then continued through. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe Christopher is the one who taught Estrella the art of changing identities.
Well, I mean, think about it. They run off together, and the next thing you know, they're getting married. She's under a new name. He had to have showed her how to do it.
Right. And only she is under a different name. He uses his legal name, Christopher DeBoard.
He does. Well, his legal name, but I am not convinced, just my opinion, I am not convinced that he did not use other identities besides the 5 that we knew about. The 5 that we knew about were all when he was trying to take advantage of the VA system. And I am not convinced that there are other identities that he may have used as well over the years. But you're right. He got married under his legal name.
Yeah. So maybe, so the big picture is maybe they left Danville together, which also tells us it's a little different than just deciding, I'm just going to walk away from my husband and child right now.
It just gives context that she's maybe walking away from the choices that were made for her and walking to someone else.
Right. Exactly.
Which there's a modicum of understanding there. The biggest thing that trips me up is why didn't she take Mary Rose with her? Like if she'd taken Mary Rose and walked away from that life, that would make a little bit more sense. Leaving Mary Rose behind still gives me pause, you know?
Sure. Well, I'm certainly not saying I'm not saying that part is understandable. I'm just saying leaving with somebody else in that sense of running toward a dream.
Yep.
Throughout her life, one thread that runs through from everything we can find is this like fantastical sort of, she seems to fantasize a lot. And we even talked about that with Terry. So, you know, the way she even talked about her childhood. And when I say fantasy, I'm not talking about a positive one. She described her childhood as very Cinderella-like and that kind of thing. So, you know, she's still a teenager. She's older now, and Christopher, we know the kind of the way he would have been successful at navigating the things that he did, he had to be somewhat charming. And so maybe he promised her a lot. It certainly promised her more than what she had or something different than what she had. So,
and more than he could give her.
And really more than he could give her. Yeah, for sure. And then also we think about they ran off to Springfield. We had always looked for somebody she might have been running to in Springfield. And that might still exist. We're working on that now, actually, possibly family there or something, a connection. But it also makes sense to go to Springfield. It is a relatively close by, larger place where they could go unnoticed. If they stayed in the Danville area, they're not going to go unnoticed. So took on a new identity, got married within a few months, maybe weeks of leaving. We don't know exactly when she left. So general thoughts about what we've learned about Estrella from Nina, not just in the clips that we heard, but the larger recordings that you and I are aware of, and what it could mean for her overall story. What are some of your thoughts?
One of the things that I think I've said this before, but I want to say it again, is the way that Nina speaks about Estrella, to me, points that there's a bond between them, that they had a relationship. Yeah. And I think it's important. You know, she was the little sister and also one of the children that Stella was charged with caring for. And Nina didn't hate her. She longed for her. She wanted to know what happened to her. And I think that's an important thing. Stella was cared for.
Yeah, she was. If she ever felt like she couldn't go back because of shame of her choices or whatever, which is understandable. I get that. I wish that she could have known that at least Nina, we have in her own words, Nina longed to see her again. She was missed. Mm-hmm. And clearly she was loved. I did not hear shame or accusation in Nina's story. I feel like Nina was pretty empathetic. The couple of times she talked to me, I think I said this earlier, she kept coming back to, she was just a kid. She was just a kid.
Yeah.
I don't think Nina really held that against her, at least not to the point that it surpassed her care for her. And I wish she could have known that. I think it might have made a difference.
I think that the other thing that it paints is that before she was even 18 years old, she had already had her life imprinted by a series of choices that she did not make or made on her behalf. That relates to almost everything. Relates to leaving her family of origin and coming to this family that was not her family of origin. Again, I'm not saying that it was a bad scenario. I don't even know why. I don't know what the reasons were. But those were not choices she made when she's 8 years old. Someone made them for her. And then she was initially in St. Louis. They were living in a metro area or in the Spanish ghetto, like in this urban place. And then all of a sudden, Manuel and Rosa get married and they move to a small rural, country. I have no idea how she feels about that, but I just know how most kids that are 10, 12 years old are going to feel about that. Like it's going to feel very different going from this urban area to this more rural area. Then there's the issue of, the marriage to Emil, which may not have been something that she was completely on board with. It just paints a picture that she did not have a lot of choices. And then this marked an opportunity for her to be in the driver's seat. Fortunately, I'm not convinced that all the decisions she made in the driver's seat showed that she was prepared to make those choices in a responsible way. But I just think that's a very interesting understanding of the big picture. It appears that she was walking away from the life that she did not choose.
Yeah. Again, it doesn't absolve anybody of anything. And we're not here to play judge and jury, but it does paint a different picture to realize, like, if she was in a relationship or left with another man, specifically Christopher, the man she ended up marrying, it means she was being influenced by somebody else. Now, that does not remove her responsibility for the choices that she made, but it hits different when you know that she was likely influenced by somebody else. There was somebody else at least alongside of her. I'm not saying he was manipulating her or anything like that. I'm just saying alongside of her.
Well, I might say that.
Well, he may have been, but I'm just saying, at the very least, if that's what happened, there is somebody else. It's not just Estrella deciding on her own. It's running to something as opposed to away from something.
But here's the deal. As soon as she married Christopher, she committed a felony.
Yes.
Whether she was aware of this or not, as soon as she committed that felony, a course for her in the future in which she would also have choices taken away from her.
Yes.
And so she, even if she was leaving this life thinking it was going to give her the chance to make more choices, the actual decision to commit the felony handcuffed her more than maybe she was even in her previous life. And we'll talk about what that means in the future.
And I don't know about this. You bring up a really good point. I don't know what the legal ramifications would be of a woman walking away from her husband. Obviously, it would be cause for him to, it would be a charge in a divorce, but legally, I don't know. Or walking away from her child. At this time, legally, there may have been some legal ramifications for those.
There certainly were.
But that doesn't even touch on the fact that this is a Roman Catholic family. And there were some considerable moral objections to those things as well.
Correct.
Nina was born into the same house where Estrella grew up. She watched the same people. She knew things that never made it into any record that we've ever been able to find or that we ever would be able to find, because they're not the kind of things that you write down. They're the kinds of things that you say out loud decades later into a cassette recorder, not knowing who might be listening one day.
We were listening, and what she said changes things. Next week, we're going to hear more from Nina, but we will also have a guest with us.
Yes, I'm really excited. Next week, Paul, our mom's first cousin, son of Mary Rose, who is the first daughter of Estrella, Paul is going to join us. And we are going to dive back into the Nina tapes, the Nina recordings, to hear more about their family. And I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, he's going to share with us what this journey has been like for him. And together we're going to listen to Nina share about life with Manuel and Rosa. And there are some funny stories.
There are some funny stories. I'm excited about that. We are going to continue to search and to listen, seeking to know our story. And Nina definitely has some of that story to tell.
Until next week, keep pulling the thread.
Thanks for listening. If you're walking your own search through DNA, silence, or a name you can't quite place, you're not alone.
If you want to go deeper on this story, you can find us on Substack at buriedthreads.substack.com. That's where we release every episode, along with documents, photos, and the kind of details that don't always make it into the audio.
You can also find and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And if you haven't yet, subscribing or leaving a review makes a real difference in helping other people find us.
For more photos, recap videos, polls, and the occasionally chaotic behind-the-scenes moments, find us on Facebook and Instagram. We're at Buried Threads.
And if something we've shared has stirred something in your own family story, we really do want to hear it. Reach out. You might be surprised where a single thread leads.
Until next time, keep pulling the thread.